All right, beautiful people. This week we have an amazing episode of the Silicon Valley to Spirituality Show. I have two guests, Willie McKenzie and Kenya Alexander. They were both guests on this podcast together. They're both friends of mine. They're both friends with each other, too. Willie tends to have conservative leanings. Kenya tends to have progressive leanings. And we thought it would be a great idea to get together to have a conversation about wokeness, politics, things of that nature. And you know what? The essence of this podcast isn't to prove one person right, the other person wrong. It's really to showcase how people can disagree on things and still be friends, still have a civil conversation, still be able to figure out a different compromise. And if there is no compromise, still be okay with the way the other person thinks. And I think that is the beauty of today's podcast and why I believe it is so powerful. So without further ado, let's jump into the podcast. I have a very special podcast that I will be hosting today. The podcast title is called Woke, Anti-Racism, and Navigating Difficult Conversations. I'm joined by my two good friends. I'm going to introduce them one by one. First, we have Kenya Alexander of Flower. I don't know if Flower is the full name of the company, but I refer to it as Flower. Kenya, can you say hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. The title sounds so serious, but I think that this is going to be such a good time.
Yes, yes. And then we have Willie McKenzie, mastermind or the CEO of the Cannabis Mastermind, Elite Cannabis Operators. Willie, can you say hello?
What's happening, guys? How we doing? This should be an interesting conversation. This is something that Kenny and I have been talking about for a long time, so I'm excited to be here and hopefully we can all express ourselves intelligently.
Yeah. And the reason why we're doing this podcast is we're actually all members of this mastermind, the Elite Cannabis Operators. And of course, within Elite Cannabis Operators, there are a whole bunch of differing opinions. But what I love is we have people with differing opinions, differing viewpoints, but we all are here trying to work things out, trying to understand each other. So the purpose of today's call, we talked about the title of the podcast, which can sound very, very serious, woke anti-racism, navigating difficult conversations. And we decided to do this despite, this being a difficult conversation because we're all friends here. We all have differing opinions. We all have different viewpoints, yet we're able to get along. And I think this could be a good example of how people could have conversations and have differing opinions and not necessarily have to agree with each other, but still be okay and still walk away like thinking I understand that person a little bit more. And so obviously we're living in a time right now where there is a lot of political polarization, different ideological things that are going on, and a lot of very, very strong opinions here. So we're creating a safe space for all of us to communicate about our personal experiences, about how these experiences shaped our belief systems today, and where we hope to be able to go based on this discussion. So why don't we go into part one? And thank you, Kenya, for creating a framework for this, because I think this will really allow me to stay on task here because I tend to be a little bit verbose and can meander when I speak. So let's talk about the evolution of the term woke. Okay, when I first heard the term woke, it was, I can't remember, but I always thought of it as a very, very positive thing. But throughout the last few years, it's kinda like the word vape. Vape used to be about healthiness. Now I think vape is about giving kids, like, nicotine jewel devices, and it's not a very positive thing. So let's talk about the term woke, okay? It was originally rooted in Black activism, and it's now a word with varying meanings depending on who's using it. So let's explore that evolution. So my first question today is, and I would love to hear from both Kenya and Willie, is how do you interpret the original meaning of woke? And what did it mean to you growing up or early in your journey?
I guess I can start. I think that woke for me is just a term that has just been used throughout the revolution, right? The revolution of Black people and just really coming into an equal playing field in America. And you have like it's a word with such history in music and in language, in the way that we communicate with each other and have communicated with each other throughout history just to make sure that we are staying safe. It has transitioned so much so that I think sometimes the original intention has been lost and changed. But I think for so many people who may have a similar, like, viewpoint as me, it is still such a word that has a lot of meaning in our culture, in our history.
Yeah, and would you can you elaborate a little bit about what that word has in or what type of meaning it has in your culture and history?
Yeah, so I mean, like, there are throughout traveling, right? Like, traveling as a Black person throughout history has been, like, a ordeal, right? Like, you it is even as, one of the fears. My family and I, we lived on the road in an RV for 13 months. And one of the fears that, like, a lot of my family had was that, like, we would come across places that we weren't safe in. And so, like, staying woke, like, throughout history is a way to communicate, like, where is it safe for us to be? Because you have to stay aware of all of the things that are going on around you as a Black person, because there are some spaces that are just still not safe and have historically been unsafe, especially being a Black woman in the South.
Yeah, and Willie, what about you? How do you interpret the definition or meaning of woke, and has it shifted for you as, the years have passed?
Um, for me, it's only shifted recently, right? I don't come from the Black community. I didn't grow up in the Black experience in America. And so really when I started hearing woke was like a decade ago. Um, and it was kind of this general term used for social justice, right? And so for me, that's always been what it meant. And it has represented kind of this slew of issues that people wanted to fight for. And I think that it has become, um, something that's used negatively today in a lot of circles. And so, much like many words that kind of evolve over time or get bastardized, like something that started out with good intent has been kind of co-opted and turned into something that, if you say, this whole conversation actually started because of a job posting that said no woke bullshit, which, to me as an employer means like, I don't want any of the problems that are associated with this like kind of social justice warrior in the workplace that's constantly looking to pick a fight over something or sue over something. Because that has been my reality as an employer and a lot of people's realities, as employers. So I don't have the deep cultural history with it. I have the recent cultural history with it. And so, when I hear the term woke, it's got literally nothing to do with race. If you listen to Bill Burr talk about woke, um, Bill Burr says that white women destroyed the word woke. So um, that's kind of my background and take on it.
Yeah, I was curious, does the word woke still resonate with you in the way that it once did?
I'm trying to pick my words carefully because this is a a sensitive subject, and I just want to be clear when I speak.
Okay, so I think that the term woke now means way too many things, right? Like it is just like it has become a blanket term where it was never intended to be. And there are all types of I won't say, I want to say nonsensical, but that is just my perspective, right? There are these other problems that people see as real problems for them, maybe. Um, but they've thrown that into the woke bucket. And it was, that is not what the word means to me. So like Willie was saying, this did start off of like anti woke, like that anti woke post. And I think I think for me, when if I went and saw a job posting that said anti woke, that would make me feel like this is not going to be a safe space for me. This is not somewhere like it is in my best interest to stay woke, right? I need to be woke. I need to be aware of what's going on around me, because even though racism looks different now, it is still there, right? And so there's a different level of attention that I need to pay at this point. So when I see anti woke, for me, it makes me feel like maybe that's not somewhere that I'm going to be safe, and I maybe that's not going to be a safe space. But I also totally get Willie's perspective, especially in that he doesn't have the same experience that I've had, right? Like, he's a white man in the world, and so he doesn't have the same relationship to the word. And it is so much shit that is in the woke term at this point that it's really hard to differentiate. And and I think that you have to be very clear, like almost over communicate at this point now when you say anti woke. Like, say what you actually mean instead of, because this is such a blanket term now, using the blanket term. But same thing, like, I don't walk around going saying like I'm woke, right? Like, that is just not a thing that I walk around saying. But because I'm very clear about what I care about, if that makes sense.
I think, with regards to that specific post, right? When you think about, like, if you were hiring somebody and you looked at their Instagram and it said woke AF or something in their bio, you are now opening yourself up to a litany of potential issues that you don't even know about yet. Like you said, Kenya, it's like, well, what are they woke about? I don't know. When somebody, I think of that when somebody is like literally on the look for discriminatory practices, right? And so when you bring in somebody who is woke AF, it's like, all right, well, here we go. Guess I'm going to get sued here for something, and it's usually, nothing intentional. Oftentimes, pretty minuscule or minute, but bringing that level of like scrutiny about things that you're not even aware of into the fold, it just doesn't feel safe for an employer, right?
I thought about something interesting because, I was not aware that the term woke had its roots, all the way back to Black activism. I thought it was more of like a recent thing, like, hey, I've had like an awakening. I see what's going on in this world now. And, what's interesting is I used to live in a very, very progressive area. Now I live in a conservative area. And so progressive people have the term woke. And to me, conservative people have the exact same term. They call it taking the red pill, right? And in the Matrix, taking the red pill is realizing that you are in some sort of simulation and there's some like deeper truth. So to me, it's kind of like awakening from the fact that there is like this thing that we think of as real that is the illusion, right? So woke and red pill to me have different ideologies, but they have like the same essence of like, hey, we're awake now. We're going to take the red pill. We're going to see what's behind the code of physical reality. And so this wasn't a question on the thing, but I was just curious, Willie, like if you saw an employer write a posting that said, keep this red pill bullshit out of here, like how would that affect the way that you felt, or would that make it any different for you to see like if an employer had wrote no woke bullshit and then another employer wrote no red pill bullshit?
No, because I I think that that's that, like take for instance a very progressive business, a Ben and Jerry's, for instance. Maybe I don't want to work there. Maybe that's just not my people, Maybe I fit in better somewhere else. I'm not going to pitch a fit over it. I'm just going to keep on scrolling and look for another job. Um, I don't think that that is necessarily even discriminatory. It's just letting people know like what type of work environment this is. This is a no nonsense, come in here, put your head down and work type place. We might have disagreements. Every disagreement that we have doesn't mean that I'm anti this or racist or against whatever the heck you are, your religion, your whatever. Um, and so I don't have a problem with a business posting like, hey, we're super progressive. And if you don't align with our ideals, this might not be a great place for you to work.
Thank you. Kenya, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hear you. I think that, I mean, yes, I agree with Willie. Like, if this is not the place, every place doesn't have to be aligned with all of my values and all of everything that I agree with. I think that a lot of times, like, for me, I'm a part of a lot of organizations. I'm a part of a lot of different groups, right? And each group I go to get my fill of whatever it is that I'm getting in that group, right? So I have a group that I go to for advocacy stuff, and so but in each of the groups I interact in, I'm bringing a little bit of my perspective in, but the focus still remains the same, right? Like everyone is not going to be working on the same things that you're working on, and I don't necessarily think that means that you can't find common ground and find things that you align on. But I think a lot of times people just have like, it's almost like everyone's telling us what they believe, but they're not expanding on it. So, like, we're left to come to our own conclusions about what that means and what that looks like. And so, I think that at the end of the day, you really just got to talk to people, right? You got to talk to people and figure out what they actually mean when they say they're this, or when they say they advocate for this, or when they say they don't want any of this. What are you actually saying? But sometimes I think that that's lost because we just jump into our conclusion and we jump into, okay, this means you're this. And sometimes it's just like the route there doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. I think that having heard how people responded to that post on both sides, it very much does confirm to me what you just said, Kenya, is, well, what extra details are you putting into this post? For me, when I read it, it's like, okay, hey, this guy doesn't want this type of employee coming in that could potentially, you know, maybe make problems where there are no problems. And that's it. That's as far as I saw it. I just scrolled by. Then I know other people that read that was like, wow, I definitely wouldn't want to live there. This means that guy is believes in X, Y, and Z. And in my mind, I was just like, well, you can believe that, or you could just believe that he doesn't believe in X, Y, and Z. And as the CEO of his company just doesn't wants to protect the culture of his company and doesn't want this type of environment or this type of ideology to be infiltrating his organization. And man, this is really hard to not put my opinion in, so I'll do a better job moderating. So my opinion aside, are there other words or movements that you have seen that have undergone a similar evolution? And if so, how do we really reframe this language for the sake of progress?
I can start there. I think there are so many movements who they have gotten just a lot of, it's kind of confusing about what's actually going on and what's actually like what's happening. I think feminism is a perfect example of that for me. Like as a black woman, feminism is kind of like an interesting topic because I think that from my perspective, in most cases, it's a version of white feminism that really doesn't include the perspective of Black women. And so sometimes now that I am like, I've been in more women's circle and I'm learning more about like the feminist movement, because my understanding is I don't know what are y'all talking about was always my thing. Like, I don't get what you're talking about. But like, as I am talking to more feminist women, I'm finding the areas that like, okay, after we get through this, like after we get through that, okay, there we go. Now we can, okay, now I can find something I can relate to. So I think that that's one of the things that has also gotten like a little bit away from the original purpose and has like a lot of things under that umbrella now that I think sometimes go away from the initial core and the initial root of why feminism started.
Hmm. Very interesting. Willie, what are your thoughts?
After, kind of looking back at the origins of the term woke, I don't know that there's any other words that I'm familiar with that actually have like a significant meaning that have been, I would say, co-opted and bastardized over time. I think that there's a lot of words that become kind of common in American slang that start in the Black community. Um, and that's pretty typical. A lot of people are interested in hip hop culture, a lot of the things that kids, I don't even know. I hear the stuff that the kids are saying nowadays. I don't even know what they're talking about. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents being like, what the fuck are you talking about? So I think that's just kind of a generational thing. Um, but yeah, I think that in terms of like, culturally significant, I think woke is probably the one that I'm now familiar with.
Oh, I would say actually, now that I actually think about that, the N word I think is an example of a word that has like really had a drastic change in the meaning of it and like in how that language has developed. But yeah, that's an interesting that I was just thinking that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll kind of put in one of my examples that I struggled with was, the pronoun they and them. I thought, well, you could choose any other pronoun. This one grammatically seems very difficult to understand if one person's coming or two people are coming. And I remember that I was speaking to someone about this, and they were younger, and they just had a difficult time having any type of understanding why I would have a difficult time. They're just like, just language evolves, Uncle Seibo. Just use the word. There's no reason you need to keep questioning it. Just use it. Language has evolved. It has a different meaning now. And I just kept on getting stuck because you kept on saying they are coming. And I thought, multiple people were coming. So I just cooked one meal for one other person. So that's why I got stuck on it. And it really did kind of show me like the difference between generations where, I was very stuck on grammar and they're just like Uncle Sabo, like that's just the word that we use now. Either you evolve with us or you make a big deal about it, it's up to you. And if you make a big deal about it, you'll constantly struggle with the grammar. If you just go with the flow, then it's just another word that you just use to replace it. And I've been marinating on that one for a while because I was thinking, how much of my own suffering about this word is from other people versus me? And I like to take complete responsibility and autonomy and accountability about the way I feel. And so the framework that I developed in my mind is I could be aware of things, but I don't have to let them affect me. Being aware of things and allowing them to affect me are two separate things. Okay, so enough about me. Let's go on to section 2. Anti-racism.
Can I touch on that
Oh yeah,
too?
yeah.
Because I agree with you, Sabo. I think though in some ways it feels like yes, understand, like yes, and like let people do what they're going to do, but also like sometimes it feels like everyone's trying to loop in, just like this is the human experience. And yes, that is so true that we are each living a human experience, but we're all living very individual experiences. And I feel like sometimes when we're trying to change the language, it starts to generalize people's experience to where we just have to do a lot of work to now separate ourselves and figure out the ways in which we're different, right? And I think the whole thing is we came to this human experience to have an individualized experience. And so there are distinctions in my experience that we've all developed these clues to be aware of what to be more aware of how our experiences relate and how they may differ. And so I think that that is important to recognize, that while we can like definitely respect someone and not like I if you want to be there, then just let me know. I'll call you whatever you want your name, whatever you would like me to call you, like let's do that. I'm fine with that. That is cool with me. But also like it should still be okay for me to have this experience that I want as well without the pushback on it. And so I think that that's kind of where like if you want to do what you want to do, I'm happy to do that too, but that doesn't mean that I have to adopt that um same same responsibility over bringing this new idea into the world.
Yeah. I like that, I like that.
I think that's
Willie?
a good example of, one of the things that's kind of been lumped in with woke culture, right? This idea of like misgendering people, um, in the workplace where there's so many pronouns available, people can kind of like call themselves whatever they want. And if you were to call them by the wrong thing, it's incredibly offensive and becomes, this discriminatory thing when it's totally unintentional. And to me, I don't care if you're trans, like go do whatever you want. I would never push my ideals on somebody else. I just expect that nobody else does the same to me. Um, and so that's one of the things where I resist that a bit. That there's such a big systematic push. Like, I would assume, say, well, your nieces and nephews, whoever they are, they, them, niece, nephew, um, probably go to school in California, and so that's probably not something that's just coming from a change in their cultural language, but something that's being taught to them in schools, and that's something that I resist a bit. But I think that's another thing that's kind of lumped in with the woke ideology, and a reason that a lot of people take issue with it.
All right. Are we ready to jump to the next topic? Okay, awesome. Anti racism. Is this action or awareness? So, the concept of anti racism has been very central to many discussions on equality and social justice, but it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think, what I'm really gleaning out of this conversation so far is how many words that we use with each other daily that means something to us, but means something slightly different to someone else. And I think really clarifying like what you mean by these things. Cause yeah, like if these things aren't defined clearly and one person has a slightly different definition, I believe a lot of the miscommunication happens in how these things are not defined the same for each person. So in the nature of that question, or in the spirit of that question, how do each of you define anti-racism? Is it more of an internal mindset? Does it require outward concrete actions?
You go
Okay,
first on there, Willie.
I'll lead off on this one. Um, I think that being against racism is 100% right, and everybody should be against racism. I think that the anti racist movement in the United States perpetuates racism and has been taken way too far, and has now become more of a grift and about kind of creating division between people, and it's gone far past. And maybe that was the original intent, I certainly believe that there are systems of power that want black people and white people and brown people pitted against each other, that want women and men pitted against each other, that want Christians and Catholics and Muslims pitted against each other. And so if that was the intent, they knocked it out the park. But if the intent was actually to stop racism, I don't think it's been very helpful doing that at all.
I don't know. I guess maybe I live in like an idealistic fantasy, but like I think that the majority of my experience has been not that people are pitted against each other, but that we just like people want things to be different or better. And so like anti-racism to me like it's less what you say and how you move in the world, the things you support, right? Like the people that you uplift, the way you spend your dollars, the way you spend your time, right? Like, what are you actually doing? And it's less of like, um, it doesn't have to be a thing. It has to be more of an intention, I guess, in my mind. And so it's like you're just intentional and you're aware about the actions that you take and how it affects the structure of racism. But I don't necessarily think it's like, I mean, I guess I don't know that anti racism for me creates more racism from my perspective.
There was an interesting thing that I caught on. And, Willie talked about, yeah, definitely, we should all resist racism. Now, I know that being from a very liberal area, there's always kind of like the man is always doing something. And then when I ask, well, who is the man? No one could really identify the boogeyman. And so, Willie, you were talking about like, hey, maybe these people are trying to drive division between men and women and between the races. I was just curious, who are these people?
Oh, you want me to get flat Earth on you? Um, no, I mean, all right. So I do believe that there is, a movement of elites in this country and globally that want to create, a global economy, a global movement, and kind of dissolve what it means. Or dissolve the things that make America great, right? And one of the things that makes America great is our diversity, right? This is a social experiment where there are so many different people, different races, different ethnicities, different religions, all living together largely in harmony. Um, and to some people, that's not good. So I don't think that, that the establishment is necessarily uh, a group of rich white men that sit up top pulling strings. I think that there are people of all races involved in it, and I think it's a global thing that wants to see America different than it is today, where we have free speech and a lot of rights that people don't have in other places. So that's one of my fears ultimately, and the way that they're able to kind of pull their strings and make things happen in the background is by creating things like this propelling racism to the front, and talking about it so much, like it's like it's the biggest issue, and hearing the most dangerous person in America is the white man and things like that. It's like, I mean, I don't see it, you know what I mean? And I don't see the pervasive racism that's talked about. And I look at the mayor of Chicago the other day getting questioned, and it's like whenever somebody disagrees, it's a race thing. It's like, it's not a race thing. We disagree because we disagree. And I think that by pushing these kind of issues, race, gender, those kind of things to the forefront, that they pull people apart, keep us fighting amongst ourselves. and they're able to do their thing in the background. Insidious, I would call it.
Very interesting. Kenya?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I do think that race is just being used as a talking point at this point with no one actually solving the issue of racism. Because while everything is not about race, there are some things that are about race and have been about race. And so I think that because there are some things like there's some truth in what is going out there, and I don't watch the news. I really don't consume like news media just because it is like to me a little bit of propaganda, a little bit of puppeteering. And so I don't have like a big frame of reference, but I see the stuff on social media, and I think that overall like I said, anti-racism is more of an action and intention than just a talk or just saying that you feel this way. And I guess I agree with Willie where people are just like kind of trying to pull the strings of racism and no one's trying to really solve the issue.
Yeah, you know what's kind of interesting to me about this is that um, liberals also think that there's some elites pulling the strings, but for different reasons. And so I think the interesting, or what I glean out of this, is that whether you're conservative or progressive, is that both sides believe that there's some greater entity that is puppeteering, that is somehow creating more division between the groups of people that relate to these differing ideologies. And so I guess for me, it's nice to know that we all think that there's some, you know, reptilian, Sith, Illuminati, whatever you want to call the secret societies that's running things. And to me, it makes sense. You know, it makes sense that there's this belief, but then the belief systems are different. And due to the belief differences, instead of concentrating on who these master puppeteers actually are, we, as the puppets, continue to quibble with each other and not, and I mean, you know, I'm 48 right now, so I think I'm the senior person on this call. So I've been aware of, at least conscious of, at least 10 presidential cycles in my life. And I had noticed that when I was younger, it was gay marriage, immigration, and gun laws that were the big issues. And here we are 40 years later, immigration, maybe pro-life, pro-choice is now one of them, but gun laws also. And it seems very kind of like coincidental to me that why is it that after 40 years, it's still these same issues? And, you know, perhaps that is the meta game that is being played by the puppet masters here. Okay, so let me go to this last question here. So, what role does personal accountability play in anti racist efforts? And how do we keep ourselves and others accountable without turning the conversation into cancel culture?
Oh, I'll take this one first. Is that okay, Willie? I think personal responsibility is the only thing that matters in anti-racism, right? Because we've seen like the system is really like it's made up of us. It's made up of us as individuals, and so we have to take a personal responsibility to be anti-racist, to really be aware of the division that is being caused around us for whatever reason. And I think that the way that we hold people personally responsible is just like this, just having conversations. Personal responsibility doesn't have to mean that you're disciplining someone or you're making them change their mind. It literally is just having a conversation where we could say our own perspectives and share those perspectives without any expectation of the other person to like make some drastic change. It's literally just sharing stories and finding the ways that we relate more than the ways that we differ, because there are so many more ways that we can relate to each other than the differences that separate us.
Mhm. William, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of this, I think of, and this isn't something that I've come across in my life where I've seen outward racism in person, right? But I would stand up for somebody uh, in person if I was to see some outward racist instance occur, the same way that I would step up for somebody if they were abusing a child or trying to kidnap a woman or doing anything that goes against my values, right? I'm not just going to sit there and drink my coffee while I see something horrible happen. That's just not the kind of person that I am. I don't think that everything is racist. And I think that, unfortunately, I think there's two things here, right? There's being anti-racist, which is being against racism, which I think everybody should be. And then I think that there's an anti-racism movement that has kind of, I think about it like the boy who cried wolf, right? Where it's like every single little thing you get slapped with a racism tag. And it's like, when you do that, that used to be the most powerful word in this country. Nobody ever wanted to be labeled a racist. And now it has been abused to the point where it doesn't really have any power anymore because so many people just throw it out there. You disagree with me, you're a racist. Okay, well, now it really doesn't mean anything. And so that's where I struggle with the anti-racism movement as a whole, right? The grifting, the taking, if you go on TikTok, you can sign up for people's classes on how not to be racist or to have them point out, your biases and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that I struggle with, right? It's the bastardizing of something that is good, right? Anti-racism is good. This anti-racism movement that we're seeing today I don't think it's good. I don't think it's helpful.
Willie, have you been called
Yeah,
racist?
absolutely.
Have you been called a racist?
Absolutely. If you read through, yeah,
Me too.
you know,
Me
if
too.
you read through my LinkedIn, you know what I mean? I get called dumb hillbilly, redneck. I get called all kinds of things that wouldn't be appropriate for, me to sling back at somebody with more melanin in their skin. Um, and I just let it roll off my back because people are just so outrageous at this point. It's like, it doesn't matter to me because I know it's not true. Right. But like 10, 15 years ago, if you got called a racist on the internet, it was like, it was the end of the world. But now it's just been hurled around by everybody and their mom. It's lost its power.
Yeah, I said I wasn't gonna interject my opinion, but I am, and I do feel like this is kind of more like a three-way conversation. So just kind of humor me for a second. I really like to think about life as like this and that versus this or that, and whether it's woke, whether it's anti-racism. I definitely believe that there's positive and negative manifestations of each depending on how you're implementing it, right? Like as Willie said, being anti-racist, we should all be striving for that. Like like helping others that are in predicaments where they need help or maybe that they are struggling. Then at the same time, I could also see like, yeah, it's definitely been weaponized where there might not be any issue other than someone accidentally said the wrong pronoun and then all of a sudden there is this visceral attack, or just because someone has one conservative ideology they get lumped in with like the extreme right or the extreme left, right? And so I think that what would be really beneficial for us as a society would be to realize that there is validity in everyone's personal experience. I have the experience of being a person of color, but Kenya has a experience of being a person of color and being a woman. So I can talk about the difference between, okay, being a man and being a person of color. But, one of the things that I hear in a lot of groups, whether I'm with my wife and she's with her female friends, or I'm in women's groups where, I could just be a fly on the wall and listen, is just how unsafe women feel all the time. And I've heard this throughout my life, but I just kind of thought, okay, maybe at nighttime in a bad neighborhood, you feel a little bit threatened. But, I started hearing like, yeah, just coming out of Target, like, some guy's looking at me, it makes me feel a certain way. And of course, in my mind, it's like, well, maybe they were just looking at you. Like, you're the one that's making yourself feel this certain way. But I also understand, well, actually, I've never felt I've never felt threatened for my physical safety. So whenever people look at me, I have no like it's just like, all right, they're looking at me. I have no reason to fear for my safety. And it's because I haven't experienced that. And so I guess this is just my long, convoluted way of saying, like, yeah, it does suck to have people make general stereotypes about you just because of your skin color and call you a hillbilly or think that reverse racism is okay, which I absolutely detest and do not think is the right thing. But at the same time, I'm also open to someone telling me something and taking it as their truth and that that's real for them, and not not minimizing what their experience is because I haven't experienced it or it doesn't resonate with me. Any thoughts from the two of you after
Seba,
what I
I
shared?
think Yeah, I think you said something like I love language. I love the art of words and I love the way in which words can really change communication, right? And I think that one of the words that like really stood out to me is that you said that women like fear. And I don't even think like as a woman or as a black person, it's a fear, more of an alertness, right? It's not that like you're scared to go to places. It's just that you have to be hyper aware of what's going on in the particular situation, just in case you need to like in case there needs to be action taken. And I'm sure it's similar for every person having this experience, but I guess it's just in the way that the defense that you have available to you. I guess if that makes sense. And so it's not that like for me that I walk around scared. It's just that I'm on if when I go out of my home, like I'm on high alert. I'm having to be very perceptive of what is going on with me because like at this point like if it gets too late, my husband's not letting me leave the house. Like I'm like trapped in the house after a certain amount of time just because he's like it's dangerous out there. It's dangerous out there unless people can see what's going on. And I get it. But it's I think it's just not fear, but it is like hyper alertness. Like you gotta know what's going on.
I mean, if in this day and age, if you're not situationally aware, I mean, the world is crazy. One of the things that my wife and I do for date night is we go shooting. She's got her own guns. She's got a concealed carry license. She doesn't need it here in Tennessee, but when we were in Michigan, she got it alongside me. I let her go out of the house at night. I'm not, I'm not that worried about her, but she's a beautiful woman, and I know that there are men out there who do not have good intentions. So I want her to be able to protect herself, and so that's 100%. But I think everybody has to be situationally aware. I mean, shit is going off at churches, at schools, movie theaters. There's a lot of evil in the world, unfortunately, and we all have to be kind of on our toes and minding our p's and q's to make sure that we don't fall victim to some of the stuff that's going on out there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. All right. Shall we move on to the next topic? All right. And we'll keep the white guilt as a bonus topic at the end if we feel like we want to explore that. So I'll skip that one for right now. Let's go into white supremacy. Is this even a major issue today? So, white supremacy is often seen as an overt extremist issue, but it's also systemic and subtle. Well, some people consider it to be systemic, and some argue it's a major problem today, while others deny its prevalence. So let's dig into this. Um, how do we define white supremacy, and do we see this primarily as just individual actions, or is it more about systems and structures?
I can start here, I guess. Um, White supremacy is just it's an interesting just terminology, I guess. Like especially I live in the South. I've always lived in the South, right? I'm a Black person in the South. So white supremacy is just it can be defined so many ways, right? Like you have like the traditional like definition where it's like the Confederate and it's just like act like white supremacy, like very blatant and very and I don't think that that's what it is anymore. And I would even go to argue that like it's not even white supremacy at this point, but more like rich supremacy at this point, and it happens that a majority of the people who are rich are white, right? And so I guess that's but a lot of the issues that we're going through, like they're systemic issues that were created on race, but now everyone who's not rich is being affected, right? And so now it's like everybody is feeling like the pressure of white what started off as white supremacy but is really rich white supremacy, if that makes
Yeah, I certainly agree with parts of that. I mean, the things that really I struggle with is like last year we had the president of the United States say that white supremacy was the biggest danger that we face in the United States, and that basically calling it. And there was another like the Department of Homeland Security said that white supremacy was like the most dangerous terrorist threat to the United States, and I just don't see it. You know what I mean? Like I live every day as a white man here in America. I got white neighbors. I have black neighbors too, but I don't even know any white supremacists. And you would think if anybody knows some white supremacists, it would be some dude that looks like me, right? So um, I think it's a fucking boogeyman. You know what I mean? I think it's another thing like, yeah, white supremacy, these people think they're better than, I don't think I'm better than either of you guys. I know I'm not. You know what I mean? Um, and so that's really something that I struggle with, right? Is this idea of white supremacy because I just don't, you know what I mean? We've had a black president. We've got you know, some would say black vice president right now. When I was in California, she was the first Indian American senator. That's the only reason I say that. But I think that because there's two things, right? There's white supremacy when you think about like dudes with hoods on, right? And then there's white supremacy, which you would say like systemic white supremacy. And I don't think that there's any laws in this country that keep Kenya from doing anything that I can do. And so that's kind of my take on it, right? I think that it's another thing that's kind of getting thrust into the spotlight to divide people, and I don't think it's as big of an issue as the elites want to make it out to be.
I don't think there are any laws, but I think there are systems that kind of like there's no like law that makes it easier for white people, but there are definitely systems that were built in the times of like whitehood, white supremacy that are still standing today. And those systems are what kind of perpetuates racism and white supremacy from my
Can
perspective.
you elaborate on what those systems are, maybe?
Sure. Like like desegregation was a system that changed but has ultimately like harmed black people, right? So neighborhoods are more segregated than they've ever been, and they well I say that I wrote a paper about this a few years ago, but that's one of the ways redlining communities so that that in the housing system, our homes have less value. We have less equity, and we pay more money for homes. There are just like the white corporate America structure in which there are always many minorities and women in lower level positions, but going up into the higher level positions, there are no women, or there are less women and less minorities in the pay structure of things. All of these are systems that really affect the way that the things that we have to navigate to get to certain places. And that's not to say that like white people are still racist, even though there are some that are, but all of those systems that were set up in white supremacy are still standing. And those are still the systems that we use today. And so I think that that is the way that white supremacy is still alive and well.
I mean, to me, you like before you had said that maybe a lot of the things that are kind of construed to racism are probably more socioeconomic issues. And when I hear things like that, that's exactly what I think is probably, more on the socioeconomic side of things than on the race side of things. It may happen to disappropriately affect people in the black community, but I don't think that it's outward white supremacy or systemic white supremacy.
I guess this is just one example, but like there are, when you're going to sell a home as a black person, you take any pictures of anything associated with blackness out of your home when the appraiser comes, because there are statistics that show like when you have something that is representative of you being a black family, your house appraises for less. So that's the terms of the systemic issues that are kind of faced, that maybe you are unaware of or don't have experience in, but that's a real thing that we kind of deal with.
Yeah, and if I could add just a little bit of, no pun intended, color is, some of my friends are underwriters for insurance policies, health insurance, life insurance, things of that nature, car insurance. And within the underwriting community, it's fairly well known. If you have like a Anglo-Saxon sounding name, you get better rates. And if you have like a name like Seibo, um, like there's like a little ear marker on folks like that. And so, these would be things that I was just not aware of, but when I was told about that, it just kind of makes you think like, okay, well, maybe it's not overtly out there, but there is something. And I guess maybe my follow-up question would be, do you have to see something or to experience something to believe that it exists?
Um, I'm a super logical person, right? Which is one of the reasons that I struggle. I've been going to Christian church for the last year, and I struggle with some of these things. It's like, how can you tell me that's true that some dude did that like thousands of years ago? Like you weren't there, you didn't see it. It sounds out of this world. And so I'm trying to have faith and believe in things that I haven't seen. Like Sabo, what you said right now, I go to like, okay, well, how much do you pay for your life insurance? I bet mine's higher. Um, and there's so many factors that go into something like that. It's how could you possibly peg it on just race? And like Kenya said, she's got to take anything that looks black out of the house before, they come and take pictures if you're going to sell your home. I mean, I just, well, my house hasn't sold yet, but I've got my house on the market right now. And I had to take everything that made it look like I live there out of there. Um, and it didn't have anything to do with like the fact that I'm white. It's just that you want these homes to look basically like nobody lives there, which is kind of weird, but I guess I get it. It looks better for pictures. Um, I don't, I believe that racism exists in the world. I I struggle to believe that, um, like mortgages, for instance. Do banks
care about what color your skin is. Banks care about making money and whether you're going to default or not. And so when somebody brings up something like that, mortgage rates or something of that instance, I think about, well, what are the other factors that contribute? Is it just race, or is it something else too?
Based on my friends, there are many different factors, but the uncommon sounding name is one of them. And just the fact that it is one of them, shows that there is something there. And, the reason why I said, do you have to experience it to believe it's real is, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, maybe Kenya you are, but there is quite a bit of tension between like the Asian and African communities. There was like a bunch of like Asian Ivy School guys that were like in a private chat just saying all sorts of crazy stuff about Black people. And for me, I could say, yeah, that's individualistic. That's definitely not the way I think. Nor do any of my friends have I ever heard. If anything, my friends all wanna be Black, they, like, love Black culture so much, they just wanna be Black, so I've never personally have ever heard anyone in my generation say or my generation and younger, say negative things about Black people, but when I look at the generation preceding me, there is a lot of anti-Black sentiment. In Japan, you will still see like UFC fighters portrayed as like gorillas if they're Black. It's completely okay in that culture. And so for me, even though I don't personally experience a lot of these things, when someone tells me that's what they experience, I have to work at this. But when I don't personally experience what they've experienced, I try my best to just take it as face value. Like, this is what this person went through. This is what they experienced. Can I somehow empathize with that or see some truth in it, even if I haven't had direct experience myself? And that's where I've had to just kind of like think through, like, okay, hey, when I see like these Black Asian tensions in America, um, like I did take it very personally. I wanted to like separate myself away from those college kids that were saying those vile things. And even within the Asian culture, I think Willie, I was telling you, is like there's like the top tier Asians and then there's like the jungle Asians. And then like the top tier ones are like the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese. And then the lower tiers are like the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, the Hmong. And it's just really interesting to see like these things tiered out that way. But to me, like you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum, but I love this framework of consciousness called spiral dynamics, where one of the higher levels of consciousness is talking about like you do see everything as a system. And so why is it that like my parents' generation thought this way about African people? They were in a system where that ideology was okay to talk about it that way. And as we've evolved, with the next generation of Asians growing up here around African Americans and being able to communicate and kind of see like what we have in common, what is different, there is like tons of overlap in what we love, what the types of food we like, the types of music, the type of movies, and being able to connect on those similarities has been extremely powerful for myself. And so I'll just kind of wrap this up by just saying, for me, one of the ways that I've been able to navigate the world with a bit more ease and less friction was to not invalidate someone else's experience, even if it didn't seem logical or rational to me, and to take it as their truth. Now, does their truth need to affect me? Or if their truth starts affecting me, then I would say, you know, that would be a different issue. But I've also seen that many times my own personal like feeling of that day, had nothing to do with like what I saw with my two eyes and what I experienced in the outside world, but had more to do with like what I read online that day. And so I've been really cultivating, like really parsing out when I go outside what I see that day versus, how I felt when I read something on my social media feed. So, any thoughts from the two of you based on what I shared?
Yeah, I guess like for me, I think that because I'm a very logical person as well. I love like reading. I love data. I love consuming that stuff. But also, I feel like the one thing to remember is that all of the data is based on individual experiences. It's individual experiences that influence all of the data that we're consuming. And so I think that people's individual experiences when they share them with you can be a sort of logical data that you can use in your analysis as well as any of the other data that you're consuming. But like I sometimes think because I think Willie you said that like at one point we were talking and you said that you have not experienced racism, so the only thing you have to go on is the data that you're consuming. But I'm sitting here right in front of you and I'm telling you my experience and I'm telling you the data like that I've collected based on my experience walking through this world. So I would just highlight that that is also important as the other data that can also be as important as the other data that you're consuming. That can be on a level playing field with the other data that you're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that I'm interested in having this discussion is to understand, from your perspective, your experiences, like real life experiences that you've had versus something I see on social media or, data that I have read. Because honestly, the reason that this started interesting me, um, I follow a lot of Black conservative content creators. I've read a lot of books by guys like Thomas Sowell, and their perspective. When I hear something like, "Oh, there's systemic racism," and then I hear, a black man, very well educated, Harvard, Stanford, Hoover Institute, um, giving empirical data against it. I'm like, well, I want to understand this more because these things aren't lining up. What I hear in the media, um, and I don't trust the media. I don't trust anything that the media says to us anymore, which is another reason that it makes it hard to kind of take these things, as gospel. So I appreciate your willingness to, sit down and have the conversation and, share your experience.
Yeah. And what I wanted to add was when I was talking about taking people's like experiences at face value, that also extends to you, Willie. Like when you tell me what's going on in your life, like, I would never deny like what you're going through. So, just to make it clear, it goes both ways for me when I'm really taking in people's perspectives. And I have read Thomas Sowell, and, there's a lot of really pertinent, salient points that he brings across. And, I think having the perspective of 3 years ago living in the Bay Area and then now living in a rural area, I've been just around conservative people for the last 3 years, and they're wonderful people. I invite them over for holiday parties, birthday parties, Christmas parties. Like they've really welcomed me. I don't really see people based on their political affiliations, but I also recognize that this is a huge issue in our country today. And one of the things that has been very effective for me, as well as for my new conservative friends, is like the concept of like steel manning. steel manning arguments. And I don't know if you guys have heard of the term straw man and steel man, but you know, what I challenge everyone who is listening, if you guys have made it this far through, is whether you are progressive or you are conservative, is if you are progressive, what I would recommend is trying to straw man the progressive argument so you could understand where all the holes are. And then at the same time, try to steel man the conservative argument. And so you really understand all the holes in your ideology and all the strengths in the ideology that you oppose. And if you are conservative, of course, if you read Thomas Sowell, it's going to confirm your beliefs. So straw man the conservative belief and steel man the progressive belief. And for me, when I did that exercise, it really did show me the multidimensional aspect of like the world that we're living in, and really gave me a much deeper, broader understanding of both ideologies. And at least for my own research, it was that we all want a better world to live in. There's just like really differing belief systems on how we will get there. But I believe we all can agree that we want a better world, and no one is a communist, no one is a fascist, no one is a snowflake, no one is this, that, or the other. When it's so easy to label people, which is funny, we all want to get rid of labels, yet we keep labeling each other. Then I do believe, that does open up the bridge to build our world and our country back to what we think it could be when we have differing ideologies that can get along. And I think this conversation is a good example of that. And of course, it does take a little bit of restraint and openness because we all have differing opinions here, and we all want to be open to them. So I want to commend the two of you for doing this. And if it's okay, can we move into the next section? All right. All right. So the next section, I really love the title of this one: Moving Forward, a Space for Hope and Change. All right. So we've definitely covered a lot of ground. These topics are really complex. I would never myself claim to be an expert in any of these topics, other than I know that I'm a good human and that I want to give love and treat others with respect and be treated the same in return. But let's close off by talking about the ways we could all move forward and create more positive change. So, my first question is, and to either of you, what gives you hope when it comes to social progress and the conversations around race today?
Honestly, this is what gives me hope. Like being able to sit down. I don't have very many white male friends that I could sit down and have this conversation on. Sabo, you might be my only Asian man friend in life. And so like it is just so valuable, I think, to sit down and be able to talk, right? To be able to come together and actually find there's so many points of Willie's that I disagree with, and there's so many points of Willie's that I agree with wholeheartedly. And I think that that's why this gives me hope, because there are ways that we can find and work together, and there are things that we see the same. So that just tells me that like my perspective isn't totally off, and his perspective also isn't totally off, because there are so many points that we intersect on. So this is honestly what gives me hope on moving forward.
Yeah, I received that. Thank you. William or Willie. I don't know why I called you William.
It's at least the second time you've done that, but that's okay. I received that too, Kenya. Thank you. Yeah, it's these conversations, right? It's the conversations that I get to have with Spencer. I mean, if you look at, I think that some people are going to listen to this, and just because you and I disagree on things, people are going to say he's racist. Um, and so, for that reason and that reason alone, a lot of people are scared to have this conversation. And we just have to start talking, right? It's got to be open discourse. We're not going to agree on things. I don't agree on everything with my wife. I don't agree on everything with my friends. I don't agree on a lot of stuff with my parents. but that doesn't mean that we can't be friends and have love and communicate on things that we disagree on and that we agree on. So this kind of stuff gives me hope, and I would totally be open to doing this again, and continuing the conversation.
That's so awesome. So, you know, we all agreed these types of conversations is what is needed. So, how can we create more spaces for more productive, thoughtful conversations like this one?
Just showing up to spaces. It's crazy to me when people call Willie racist just because I just haven't had that experience with him. And I think that one of the things that we spend 2 hours together a week, and we have since what I joined the mastermind in November. So like that's almost a year now. And so it's showing up and actually getting to know people. Like if I let what other people are saying on the internet interfere with that relationship, we don't get to have a friendship, and I don't get to know who Willie actually is versus the perception of someone on the internet has. So I think that one thing that we can do is just get to know each other, meet each other where we're at. Me and Willie don't talk about race all the time. That is not like a normal part of the conversation, but when it comes up, we don't run away from it either. We're able to sit down and have a conversation because we have a relationship, because there's that bridge and that mutual respect. So I think just showing up and actually getting to know people yourself, especially it's on the internet, so it's not even that dangerous, right? So like just show up and talk to people.
Yeah, I really like that concept because when I really think deeply about when people start treating other people like really poorly, what's usually happening? And it's usually when they dehumanize them or just, look at them as whatever label and whatever that label brings, right? Like Willie looks like a racist. He must be a racist. And then they can say and do whatever they want to him without thinking, wow, he's actually a dad and a husband, and he runs a group where there's diversity in the group too. There's an Asian guy, there's a black girl, and just try to make Willie a one-dimensional person. And I believe that when we have conversations with each other, you see the multidimensionality in each of us and the humanity in each of us. And when you could see the humanity in someone, then it's really hard to do like negative, vile things to them. And so I really like, what you talked about, just really getting to know people, understanding where they're coming from, where their story is. And so the last question is, what's one action or mindset shift you think people can take away from today's conversation and really start implementing?
Um, I mean, I think it's important to think about whether something that you would might say to somebody on the internet, if you would say that to them in person, because I think a lot of the divisiveness that we're dealing with right now comes from the fact that there's no accountability online. You can just say whatever you want, and the likelihood that you ever run into that person is very, very low. And so people say all kinds of crazy stuff. And I don't think that that's a good representation of who they are, or the person that they're talking to, right? And so getting back to like face-to-face communication for so many reasons, not just that, right? I mean, we're seeing the kind of the fallout from it in this generation, the first generation that's brought up on iPads and iPhones. People just can't communicate like they used to, and there are tough conversations out here in the world, and those tough conversations have to be had, and they have to be had by intelligent, honest, open people who are willing to have them. And I think that's the best way forward, and probably the only way forward.
Kenya?
What's the question again?
What's one action or mindset shift you think people can take away from today's conversation and implement into their life?
Um, just talk, right? I mean, community is just so important, right? And each of us is a part of each other's community. And community communication, right? There's a thread that goes through, and it's just being able to share energy with people and being open to, let me rephrase that. Like, because I think it's also, let's share energy, but also understand that everyone's not gonna resonate with everything, right? Like, find the energy that you can share, and just don't worry about the other energy, right? So it is like, and if it becomes a point that you don't want to be around them, just don't be around them, right? It doesn't have to be like this whole internet blow up. It doesn't have to be all of that. Like, if you don't want to talk to someone, just don't talk to them. And if you do, then do, or find ways that you can.
Mm, yeah. Thank you both for sharing that. And for me, what I would like to share is, one of Willie's favorite quotes is also one of my favorite quotes. It's, life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. And when I think about this on the human level as well as on the spiritual level, it makes perfect sense either way. And, you know, I took this job very seriously of kind of being the moderator. And, my goal for today was to, and I don't think I did a very good job, but to kind of interject my own opinion as little as possible and to let the conversation flow and really not try to, you know, if I was sharing something, to try to share in a way that really wasn't trying to convince anyone of seeing things my way. And I did feel there were a few times I was sharing stuff like, yeah, I hope they see things my way. So, there's just a little bit of self awareness for me there. But when I really think deeply about things happening for me, all right. So I think I had shared the story with the two of you that when I was in high school, my high school counselor told me or asked me what I wanted to be. And I said I wanted to be a CEO. And she told me that Asian men, the best we could be would be like CTOs, chief technical officers, not leaders. Now, I believe when she told me that, that like really held me back. Really held me back. But when I think about what if that was for my highest good to have her say that to me? And when I really thought about it, it was, yeah, Seibo was a really big talker, but he really didn't do anything that he said. So when she said that to me, I was like, I'm going to prove this bitch wrong. It kind of like lit a fire underneath me. And in many ways, I see that as like this defining moment of like me going from someone that just says a lot of things to someone that says things and like does them. And so this is just one example of many things that I thought were personal betrayals that I thought were happening to me where I was the victim. And when I really thought about, oh no, this is happening for my highest good. This is serving me in a way that nothing else could serve me right now. Everything is perfect the way it's happening. What am I getting out of this if this is absolutely perfect? And I get a lot of things out of it, but the main thing that I get out of it is I get out of feeling like a victim and I get into creator mode or God mode, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like for me, that's the thing. That's the one mindset shift that I'd like everyone who has stayed this long and listened to all of us talk about this is to really think about what if that person that is constantly a thorn in your side at work or, the person that just bothers you all the time, that person is there to push you to your highest good. Maybe it's to set boundaries. Maybe it's to set expectations. Maybe it's to unconditionally love yourself. Maybe it's to be detached from what other people are doing and just focus on yourself. And I found that if you can live out that ideology that everything is happening for you, then even this presidential candidacy, could be something that you can move through with grace. And for me, when I think about expansion of consciousness, I used to think, oh, when you expand your consciousness, you just know everything. You're in flow with the universe. You have access to all this information. But it is true. As I expanded my consciousness, I saw more of the good in the world. But I also, with that expansion, saw more of the bad. And as I saw more and more of the good and more of the bad, I realized it really is everything, everywhere, all at once, or all that is. So if it is all that is, then you could always look at any situation as this isn't serving me, this is getting in the way, or this is the catalyst for me to go from Padawan to Jedi. And so I personally always choose the latter. This is always happening for me. This is for my greatest good. Oh, I owe $85,000 to the bank for something I'm not responsible for. That is my greatest good. That one took me a little while to figure out, but it was for my greatest good. And that's what I would want to leave everyone today with, is to just really think about life happening for you, not just as a ideology, but really think deeply about how is this impacting me for my greatest good if it was playing out exactly perfectly as it should. And so that is the end of the podcast. I would love it, Willie, Kenya, if you have any last words that you would like to leave for the audience listening today, I'd love to turn it over to the either of you.
I just want to say thank you guys for showing up to have this conversation. Um, it was a good time, and I think that, to Sabo's point, like at the end of the day, all of these, like if we let any of this shit stop us from doing what we're trying to do, it's a disservice to us and it's a disservice to the rest of the world. So it doesn't really matter. We're all making this up. Just go for your dreams, regardless of anything that stands in the way.
All right, everybody. My name is Seibo Shen. I have a very special podcast that I will be hosting today. The podcast title is called Woke, Anti-Racism, and Navigating Difficult Conversations. I'm joined by my two good friends. I'm going to introduce them one by one. First, we have Kenya Alexander of Flower. I don't know if Flower is the full name of the company, but I refer to it as Flower. Kenya, can you say hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. The title sounds so serious, but I think that this is going to be such a good time.
Yes, yes. And then we have Willie McKenzie, mastermind, or the CEO of the Cannabis Mastermind, Elite Cannabis Operators. Willie, can you say hello?
What's happening, guys? How we doing? Yeah, this should be an interesting conversation. This is something that Kenny and I have been talking about for a long time, so I'm excited to be here, and hopefully we can all express ourselves intelligently.
Yeah. And the reason why we're doing this podcast is we're actually all members of this mastermind, the Elite Cannabis Operators. And of course, within Elite Cannabis Operators, there are a whole bunch of differing opinions. But what I love is we have people with differing opinions, differing viewpoints, but we all are here trying to work things out, trying to understand each other. So, the purpose of today's call, we talked about the title of the podcast, which can sound very, very serious: woke, anti racism, navigating difficult conversations. And we decided to do this despite this being a difficult conversation, because we're all friends here. We all have differing opinions. We all have different viewpoints, yet we're able to get along. And I think this could be a good example of how people could have conversations and have differing opinions and not necessarily have to agree with each other, but still be okay and still walk away like thinking, I understand that person a little bit more. And so obviously, we're living in a time right now where there is a lot of political polarization, different ideological things that are going on, and a lot of very, very strong opinions here. So we're creating a safe space for all of us to communicate about our personal experiences, about how these experiences shaped our belief systems today, and where we hope to be able to go based on this discussion. So why don't we go into part one? And thank you, Kenya, for creating a framework for this, because I think this will really allow me to stay on task here, because I tend to be a little bit verbose and can meander when I speak. So let's talk about the evolution of the term woke. Okay, when I first heard the term woke, it was, I can't remember, but I always thought of it as a very, very positive thing. But throughout the last few years, It's kind of like the word vape. Vape used to be about healthiness. Now I think vape is about giving kids like nicotine jewel devices, and it's not a very positive thing. So let's talk about the term woke. Okay, it was originally rooted in Black activism, and it's now a word with varying meanings depending on who's using it. So let's explore that evolution. So my first question today is, and I would love to hear from both Kenya and Willie, is how do you interpret the original meaning of woke? And what did it mean to you growing up or early in your journey?
I guess I can start. I can start. I think that like woke for me is just a term that has just been used throughout the revolution, right? The revolution of Black people and just really coming into an equal playing field in America. And you have like it's a word with such history in music and in language, in the way that we communicate with each other and have communicated with each other throughout history just to make sure that we are staying safe. It has transitioned so much so that I think sometimes the original intention has been lost and changed. But I think for so many people who may have a similar, like, viewpoint as me, it is still such a word that has a lot of meaning in our culture and our history.
Yeah, and would you can you elaborate a little bit about what that word has in or what type of meaning it has in your culture and history?
Yeah, so I mean, like, there are throughout traveling, right? Like, traveling as a Black person throughout history has been, like, a ordeal, right? Like, you it is even as, one of the fears my family and I, we lived on the road in an RV for 13 months. And one of the fears that, like, a lot of my family had was that, like, we would come across places that we weren't safe in. And so, like, saying woke, like, throughout history is a way to communicate, like, where is it safe for us to be? Because you have to stay aware of all of the things that are going on around you as a Black person, because there are some spaces that are just still not safe and have historically been unsafe, especially being a Black woman in the South.
Yeah, and Willie, what about you? How do you interpret the definition or meaning of woke, and has it shifted for you as, the years have passed?
Um, for me, it's only shifted recently, right? I don't come from the Black community. I didn't grow up in the Black experience in America. And so really when I started hearing woke was like a decade ago. Um, and it was kind of this general term used for social justice, right? And so for me, that's always been what it meant. And it has represented kind of this slew of issues that people wanted to fight for. And I think that it has become, um, something that's used negatively today in a lot of circles. And so, much like many words that kind of evolve over time or get bastardized, like something that started out with good intent has been kind of co-opted and turned into something that, if you say, this whole conversation actually started because of a job posting that said no woke bullshit, which, to me as an employer means like, I don't want any of the problems that are associated with this, like, kind of social justice warrior in the workplace that's constantly looking to pick a fight over something or sue over something, because that has been my reality as an employer and a lot of people's realities, as employers. So I don't have the deep cultural history with it. I have the recent cultural history with it. And so, when I hear the term woke, it's got literally nothing to do with race. If you listen to Bill Burr talk about woke, um, Bill Burr says that white women destroyed the word woke. So um, that's kind of my background and take on it.
Yeah, I was curious, does the word woke still resonate with you in the way that it once did?
I'm trying to pick my words carefully because this is a a sensitive subject, and I just want to be clear when I speak.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the conversation and the lack of judgment and the openness. I really like talking to both of you guys, so it's always a treat for me, always enjoyable. And if you know me, you know that um, personal accountability, extreme accountability, is like what I'm all about. So to echo what both of you said, grab yourself by the fucking bootstraps and get after it. You know what I mean? Because nobody's coming to save you.
All right, everyone, because there's only one person, source energy. We are that. We are our own savior. So, Willie, I love you. Kenya, I love you too. Thank you both for being open to doing this. I hope everyone listening got something out of it. And yeah, let's keep loving each other. Let's keep building community and let's focus on what we want to create and not focus on the things that we don't want. Thank you guys so much.